afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is now 3 p.m., and the Secretary having advised me that a quorum is present, I hereby call this meeting to order. I'm Janine Shaw, Director and Chairman of the Audit Committee of Sagicor Select Funds Limited. There's a bit of noise in the room, though. Can we? Thank you very much. Due to COVID-19 restrictions, this is our first face-to-face meeting since the fund has been established. And it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to the third annual general meeting of the shareholders of Sagicor Select Funds Limited. I wish to extend a special welcome to Mr. Ricardo Nathan, our engagement partner of the audit firm PricewaterhouseCoopers. I'm pleased to advise that later in this meeting, after you have heard from the fund managers, the auditors, and myself, we will address any questions you may have. While we may not have time to address all the questions, be sure that we will provide a response to every question, and everyone will get an individual reply, if not here, after the meeting. And finally, regarding today's resolutions, you'll be asked to consider several resolutions at the appropriate time. The notice of the meeting was dispatched to and duly served on all shareholders in accordance with the company's Articles of Association and legislative requirements. The notice is included in the annual report at pages 4 and 5, and was also posted on the Jamaica Stock Exchange's website and on Sagicor Group Jamaica Limited's website. If there is no objection, I seek permission of the meeting that the notice of the meeting be taken as read. Do I have a proposal? Thank you, Mr. Young. Is there a seconder? Thank you. I declare the motion carried. And now, at this time, I'd like to introduce to you the directors. And I'm very pleased that we have with us today several of our directors, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce them to you. I'll start with those in person present here today. Mrs. Daniela Silvera, Chair of the Corporate Governance Committee. Dr. Warren Chin, Ms. Faith Vincent, and joining us virtually are Mr. Colin Steele, Chairman of the Board, and Mr. Omar Brown, who is, as I said before, joining us online. You will note that our annual report contains a profile of each director, and there's also information regarding the subcommittees that the directors are members of. And you will note that the directors have a wealth of knowledge and experience, and together there is a good balance of diverse skills on the board. Also, along with the directors, present here with us today is Mrs. Janice Grantaff, our company secretary. Let me also take this opportunity to highlight the excellent work done during the past year by our board committees. We are grateful to the members for their continued support despite another difficult year. The first item of business of the meeting is to receive the audited accounts for the year ended December 31, 2021, and the reports of the directors and auditors thereon. The meeting will now be presented with the audited financial statements of Sagicor Select Funds Limited in respect of the Financial Select Fund and the Manufacturing and Distribution Fund for the year ended 31st December 2021, and the reports of the directors and auditors thereon as laid out in the annual report on pages 6 and 7 and pages 32 and 63, respectively. Copies of the annual report of the directors and auditors' reports and the audited financial statements were mailed to all members and can be accessed on the JSC and Sagicor websites. Hard copies are also available at this meeting. May we have a motion that the directors' reports be taken as read? Thank you, Mr. Staples, who has proposed. And now, is there a seconder? Thank you, Mr. Bloomfield. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. I accordingly declare the motion carried. I will now ask Mr. Ricardo Nathan, the engagement partner of the auditing firm PricewaterhouseCoopers, to read the auditor's report. The key audit matters for the 2021 period are highlighted in the financial statements starting at page 32. Mr. Nathan.
Good afternoon. Independent Auditor's Report to the members of Sagicor Select Funds Limited, Financial Select Fund. In our opinion, the financial statements give a true and fair view of the financial position of Sagicor Select Funds Limited, Financial Select Fund, the fund, as at 31 December 2021, and of its financial performance and its cash flow for the year then ended in accordance with International Financial Reporting Standards, IFRS, and with the requirements of the Jamaican Companies Act. What we have audited. The fund's financial statements comprise the Statement of Financial Position as at 31 December 2021, Statement of Comprehensive Income for the year then ended, Statement of Changes in Equity for the year then ended, Statement of Cash Flows for the year then ended, and the notes to the financial statements, which include significant accounting policies and other explanatory information. Basis for our opinion. We conducted our audit in accordance with international standards and auditing ISAs. Our responsibilities under those standards are further described in the auditor's responsibilities for the audit of the financial statements section of the report. We believe that the audit evidence we have obtained is sufficient and appropriate to provide a basis for our opinion. Independent. We are independent of the fund in accordance with the International Code of Ethics for Professional Accountants, including International Independent Standards, issued by the International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants, IESBA Code. We have fulfilled our ethical requirements in accordance with the IESBA Code. Our audit approach. As part of designing our audit, we determine materiality and assess the risk of material misstatement in the financial statements. In particular, we considered where management made subjective judgments, for example, in respect of significant accounting estimates that involve making assumptions and considering future events that are inherently uncertain. As in all our audits, we address the risk of management override of internal controls, including, among other matters, consideration of whether there was evidence of bias that represented a risk of material misstatement due to fraud. We tailored the scope of our audit in order to perform sufficient work to enable us to provide an opinion on the financial statements as a whole, taking into account the structure of the fund, the accounting processes and controls, and the industry in which the fund operates. Key audit matters. Key audit matters are those matters that in our professional judgment, were of most significance in our audit of the financial statements of the current period. These matters were addressed in the context of our audit of the financial statements as a whole and informing our opinion thereon, and we do not provide a separate opinion on these matters. The key audit matter: valuation and existence of investments, refer to Note 2C and 6 to the financial statements for disclosures of related accounting policies and balances. The investment portfolio totaling $4.098 billion as at 31 December 2021 is comprised of listed equity securities. We focus on the valuation and existence of investment because investments represent the principal element of the net asset value as disclosed in the statement of financial position in the financial statements. Our audit addressed the key audit matter. We tested the valuation of the investment portfolio of listed equity securities by comparing the prices used by the fund to prices reported by the Jamaica Stock Exchange. We tested the existence of the investment portfolio by agreeing the holdings to a custodian confirmation from Jamaica Central Securities Depository Limited. No adjustments were identified as a result of the audit procedures performed. Other matter: management is responsible for the other information. The other information comprises the annual report, but does not include the financial statements and our auditor's report thereon, which is expected to be made available to us after the date of this auditor's report. Our opinion on the financial statement does not cover the other information, and we will not express any form of assurance conclusion thereon. In connection with our audit of the financial statements, our responsibility is to read the other information identified above when it becomes available, and, in doing so, consider whether the other information is materially inconsistent with the financial statements or our knowledge obtained in the audit, or otherwise appears to be materially misstated. When we read the annual report, if we conclude that there is a material misstatement therein, we are required to communicate the matter to those charged with governance. Responsibilities of management and those charged with governance for the financial statements. Management is responsible for the preparation of the financial statements that give a true and fair view in accordance with IFRS and with the requirements of the Jamaican Companies Act, and for such internal control as management determines is necessary to enable the preparation of financial statements that are free from material misstatement, whether due to fraud or error. In preparing the financial statements, management is responsible for assessing the fund's ability to continue as a going concern, disclosing, as applicable, matters related to going concern, and using the going concern basis of accounting unless management either intends to liquidate the fund or to cease operations or has no realistic alternative but to do so. Those charged with governance are responsible for overseeing the fund's financial reporting process. Auditors' responsibilities for the audit of financial statements. Our objectives are to obtain reasonable assurance about whether the financial statements as a whole are free from material misstatement, whether due to fraud or error, and to issue an auditor's report that includes our opinion. Reasonable assurance is a high level of assurance, but is not a guarantee that an audit conducted in accordance with ISAs will always detect a material misstatement when it exists. Misstatements can arise from fraud or error and are considered material if, individually or in the aggregate, they could reasonably be expected to influence the economic decisions of users taken on the basis of these financial statements. As part of an audit in accordance with ISAs, we exercise professional judgment and maintain professional skepticism throughout the audit. We also identify and assess the risk of material misstatement of the financial statements, whether due to fraud or error, design and perform audit procedures responsive to those risks, and obtain audit evidence that is sufficient and appropriate to provide a basis for our opinion. The risk of not detecting a material misstatement resulting from fraud is higher than for one resulting from error, as fraud may involve collusion, forgery, intentional omissions, misrepresentations, or the override of internal control. Obtain an understanding of internal control relevant to the audit in order to design audit procedures that are appropriate in the circumstances, but not for the purpose of expressing an opinion on the effectiveness of the fund's internal control. Evaluate the appropriateness of accounting policies used and the reasonableness of accounting estimates and related disclosures made by management. Conclude on the appropriateness of management's use of the going concern basis of accounting and based on the audit evidence obtained, whether a material uncertainty exists related to events or conditions that may cast significant doubt on the fund's ability to continue as a going concern. If we conclude that a material uncertainty exists, we are required to draw attention in our auditor's report to the related disclosures in the financial statements, or, if such disclosures are inadequate, to modify our opinion. Our conclusions are based on the audit evidence obtained up to the date of our auditor's report. However, future events or conditions may cause the fund to cease to continue as a going concern. Evaluate the overall presentation, structure, and content of the financial statements, including the disclosures, and whether the financial statements represent the underlying transactions and events in a manner that achieves fair presentation. We communicate with those charged with governance regarding, among other matters, the plan, scope, and timing of the audit and the significant audit findings, including any significant deficiencies in internal control that we identified during our audit. We also provide those charged with governance with a statement that we have complied with relevant ethical requirements regarding independence, and to communicate with them all relationships or other matters that may reasonably be thought to bear on our independence, and where applicable, actions taken to eliminate threats or safeguards applied. From the matters communicated with those charged with governance, we determined those matters that were of most significance in the audit of the financial statements of the current period, and therefore the key audit matters. We describe these matters in our auditor's report unless law or regulation precludes public disclosure about the matter, or when, in extremely rare circumstances, we determine that a matter should not be communicated in our report because the adverse consequences of doing so would reasonably be expected to outweigh the public interest benefits of such communication. Report on other legal and regulatory requirements. As required by the Jamaican Companies Act, we have obtained all the information and explanations which, to the best of our knowledge and belief, were necessary for the purposes of our audit. In our opinion, proper accounting records have been kept, so far as appears from our examination of those records, and the accompanying financial statements are in agreement therewith, and give the information required by the Jamaican Companies Act in the manner so required. Engagement partner on the audit resulting in this independent auditor's report is Ricardo Nathan, signed PricewaterhouseCoopers Chartered Accountants, Kingston, Jamaica, dated 25th February 2022. I'll now move on to the one for the Manufacturing and Distribution Select Fund. In our opinion, the financial statements give a true and fair view of the financial position of Sagicor Select Funds Limited, Manufacturing and Distribution Select Fund, the fund as at 31 December 2021, and of its financial performance and its cash flows for the year then ended in accordance with International Financial Reporting Standards, IFRS, and the requirements of the Jamaican Companies Act. The fund's financial statements comprise the statement of financial position as at 31 December 2021, statement of comprehensive income for the year then ended, statement of changes in equity for the year then ended, statement of cash flows for the year then ended, the notes to the financial statements which include significant accounting policies and other explanatory information. Basis for opinion. We conducted our audit in accordance with international standards and auditing ISAs. Our responsibilities under those standards are further described in the auditor's responsibilities for the audit of the financial statements section of our report. We believe that the audit evidence we have obtained is sufficient and appropriate to provide a basis for our opinion. Independence. We are independent of the fund in accordance with the International Code of Ethics for Professional Accountants, including International Independent Standards issued by the International Ethics Standard Board for Accountants, IESBA Code. We have fulfilled our other ethical responsibilities in accordance with the IESBA Code. Our audit approach. As part of designing our audit, we determine materiality and assess the risk of material misstatement in the financial statements. In particular, we considered where management made subjective judgments, for example, in respect of significant accounting estimates that involve making assumptions and considering future events that are inherently uncertain. As in all our audits, we also address the risk of management override of internal controls, including, among other matters, consideration of whether there was evidence of bias that represented a risk of material misstatement due to fraud. We tailor the scope of our audit in order to perform sufficient work to enable us to provide an opinion on the financial statement as a whole, taking into account the structure of the fund, the accounting processes and controls, and the industry in which the fund operates. Key audit matters are those matters that in our professional judgment were of most significance in our audit of the financial statements of the current period. These matters were addressed in the context of our audit of the financial statement as a whole and informing our opinion thereon, and we do not provide a separate opinion on these matters. Key audit matter: valuation and existence of investments. Refer to notes 2C and 6 to the financial statements for disclosures of related accounting policies and balances. The investment portfolio total 4.021 billion as at 31 December 2021 is comprised of listed equity securities. We focus on the valuation and existence of investment because investment represent principal element of the net asset value as disclosed in the statement of financial position in the financial statement. How our audit addressed the key audit matter: we tested the valuation of the investment portfolio of listed equity securities by comparing the price used by the fund to prices reported by the Jamaica Stock Exchange. We tested the existence of the investment portfolio by agreeing the holdings to a custodian confirmation from Jamaica Central Securities Depository Limited. No adjustments were identified as a result of the audit procedures performed. Other information. Management is responsible for the other information. The other information comprises the annual report, but does not include the financial statement and our auditor's report thereon, which is expected to be made available to us after the date of this auditor's report. Our opinion on the financial statement does not cover the other information, and we will not express any form of assurance conclusion thereon. In connection with our audit of the financial statements, our responsibility is to read the other information identified above when it becomes available, and in doing so, consider whether the other information is materially inconsistent with the financial statements or our knowledge obtained in the audit or otherwise appear to be materially misstated. When we read the annual report, if we conclude that there is a material misstatement therein, we are required to communicate the matter to those charged with governance. Responsibilities of management and those charged with governance for the financial statements. Management is responsible for the preparation of the financial statements that give a true and fair view in accordance with IFRS and with the requirements of the Jamaican Companies Act, and for such internal control as management determines is necessary to enable the preparation of financial statements that are free from material misstatement, whether due to fraud or error. In preparing the financial statements, management is responsible for assessing the fund's ability to continue as a going concern, disclosing, as applicable, matters related to going concern, and using the going concern basis of accounting unless management either intends to liquidate the fund or to cease operations or has no realistic alternative but to do so. Those charged with governance are responsible for overseeing the fund's financial reporting process. Auditor's responsibility for the audit of the financial statements. Our objectives are to obtain reasonable assurance about whether the financial statement as a whole are free from material misstatement, whether due to fraud or error, and to issue an auditor's report that includes our opinion. Reasonable assurance is a high level of assurance, but is not a guarantee that an audit conducted in accordance with ISAs will always detect a material misstatement when it exists. Misstatements can arise from fraud or error and are considered material if, individually or in the aggregate, they could reasonably be expected to influence the economic decisions of users taken on the basis of these financial statements. As part of an audit in accordance with ISAs, we exercise professional judgment and maintain professional skepticism throughout the audit. We also identify and assess the risk of material misstatement of the financial statements, whether due to fraud or error, design and perform audit procedures responsive to those risks, and obtain audit evidence that is sufficient and appropriate to provide a basis for our opinion. The risk of not detecting a material misstatement resulting from fraud is higher than for one resulting from error, as fraud may involve collusion, forgery, intentional omissions, misrepresentations, or the override of internal control. We obtain an understanding of internal control relevant to the audit in order to design audit procedures that are appropriate in the circumstances, but not for the purpose of expressing an opinion on the effectiveness of the fund's internal control. We evaluate the appropriateness of accounting policies used and the reasonableness of accounting estimate and related disclosures made by management. We conclude on the appropriateness of management's use of a going concern basis of accounting, and based on the audit evidence obtained, whether a material uncertainty exists related to events or conditions that may cast significant doubt on the fund's ability to continue as a going concern. If we conclude that a material uncertainty exists, we are required to draw attention in our auditor's report to the related disclosures in the financial statement or, if such disclosures are inadequate, to modify our opinion. Our conclusions are based on the audit evidence obtained up to the date of our auditor's report. However, future events or conditions may cause the fund to cease to continue as a going concern. We evaluate the overall presentation, structure, and content of the financial statements, including the disclosures, and whether the financial statements represent the underlying transaction and events in a manner that achieves fair presentation. We communicate with those charged with governance regarding, among other matters, the plan, scope, and timing of the audit and the significant audit findings, including any significant deficiencies in internal control that we identify during our audit. We also provide those charged with governance with a statement that we have complied with relevant ethical requirements regarding independence, and to communicate with them all relationships and other matters that may reasonably be thought to bear on our independence, and where applicable, actions taken to eliminate threats or safeguards applied. From the matters communicated with those charged with governance, we determined those matters that were of most significance in the audit of the financial statements of the current period and are therefore the key audit matters. We describe these matters in our auditor's report unless law or regulation precludes public disclosure about the matter, or when, in extremely rare circumstances, we determine that a matter should not be communicated in our report because the adverse consequences of doing so would reasonably be expected to outweigh the public interest benefits of such communication. Report on other legal and regulatory requirements. As required by the Jamaican Companies Act, we have obtained all the information and explanations which, to the best of our knowledge and belief, were necessary for the purpose of our audit. In our opinion, proper accounting records have been kept, so far as appears from our examination of those records, and the accompanying financial statements are in agreement therewith and give the information required by the Jamaican Companies Act in the manner so required. Engagement partner and the audit resulting in this independent auditor's report is Ricardo Nathan, signed PricewaterhouseCoopers Chartered Accountant, Kingston, Jamaica, dated 25th February 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nathan. You would have noted that you got an applause. Very well done. Thank you so much. The audited accounts for the year ended December 31, 2021, and the reports of the directors and auditors are now before the meeting for discussion. Before we take the motion on the financials, I will call upon the Chief Executive Officer of Sagicor Investments Jamaica Limited, Investment Fund Manager for Sagicor Select Funds Limited, that's Mrs. Tara Nunes, and her team to make a presentation on the performance of the company over the year ended December 31, 2021. They will provide an overview of the 2021 performance and updates for both the Financial Fund and the Manufacturing and Distribution Fund, along with the outlook for both funds. Shareholders will then have the opportunity to comment and ask questions of management. Mrs. Nunes.
Chair. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, directors, or valued shareholders. I'm happy to join you here this afternoon to share an update on the performance of Sagicor Select Funds. Before I get into the details of the company's performance and the environment in which we operated, I would like to acknowledge the members of the Sagicor Investments leadership team, some of who are with us this afternoon. Now, Sagicor Investments Jamaica Limited, as fund manager, utilizes all arms of the business to ensure that the funds are operating optimally. And so these persons play an integral role in their various capacities. The leadership team includes Mishka McLeod-Hines, Vice President of Capital Markets, Karen Richards, Assistant Vice President, Investment Client Services, Bianca Nam, Assistant Vice President, Wealth and Corporate Relationship Management, Roger McKenzie, AVP Treasury and Trading, and Jodianne Aries, the Manager of Research and Strategy. We're also happy to have with us today our Chief Investment Officer for Sagicor Group Jamaica Limited, and that's Sean Newman. Ladies and gentlemen, 2021 was another challenging year for the global economy, as governments struggled to balance saving lives and livelihoods. We were optimistic of a return to some sense of normalcy given the development and distribution of the vaccine, albeit slow and uneven. However, at the start of 2021, we had to deal with the spillover of the COVID-19 Omicron variant, as well as the intense bottleneck in the global supply chain. The sentiments for the year were to remain defensive, but cautiously optimistic. Despite the many challenges to both the macro environment and micro environment in 2021, Jamaica's economy was resilient. According to preliminary data from the Statistics Institute of Jamaica, the economy is estimated to have grown by 4.6% in 2021. The finance and insurance industry grew by some 1.9% in 2021. This was an improvement over 2020, when the industry declined by 3.8%. The industry recorded marginal improvements in performance as the government shifted policy from pandemic to endemic, relaxing containment measures. This led to higher levels of economic activity. However, the industry still lags at 3.7% growth in 2019, which was the highest over the last 5 years. We anticipate continued growth in the sector. However, this outlook faces headwinds from the threat of new variants, as well as economic uncertainty in the global markets. The ongoing Russia and Ukraine conflict and the persistent bottleneck in the global supply chain continues to put upward pressure on price levels. In 2021, Jamaica's inflation rate was 9.1%. The all-Jamaica point-to-point inflation rate, as at April 22, 2022, was at 11.8%, which remains outside of the BOJ's band of 4% to 6%, their target range. In fact, the CPI index, which is used to measure inflation, breached the upper limit of the BOJ's target 5 out of the 12 months of the year in 2021. This macroeconomic phenomenon is not unique to Jamaica. Major economies such as the US, Canada, and EU are all experiencing historic inflation rates. Like many central banks, the Bank of Jamaica has responded through monetary tightening via higher interest rates. In 2021, the bank increased its policy interest rates 3 times, from 0.5% in September 2021 to 2.5% by December 2021. To date, there has been a total of 6 rate hikes, bringing the benchmark policy rate to 5% currently. This monetary policy action that has been taken by the bank has indeed impacted deposit-taking institutions, who have been reluctant to raise interest rates given the economic climate and the competitive nature of the industry. The decisions by these DTIs not to increase rates would have slowed margins in these companies. In 2021, the JSE Financial Index was down some 4%, while the Manufacturing and Distribution Index was up 21.2%. We've seen that the manufacturing and distribution sector has been better able to withstand the negative impacts of the ongoing crisis. The local equity market rebounded in 2021. The JSE Main Market Index increased marginally by 0.14%, following a tumultuous performance in 2020, when the index declined some 22.4%. The junior market has also recovered strongly, with a return of 29.69% in 2021. Ladies and gentlemen, things are getting better, but market fears still have a chokehold on the markets. We saw some reduction in that fear in the latter part of 2021. However, given recent global flare-ups in Europe and a recessionary outlook, once again, this is dragging down market sentiment. Looking forward, there still exists a great deal of uncertainty in the markets. However, after 2 years of risk monitoring and management, I believe that we are clearer as to the strategies and systems required to mitigate any fallout in performance. Already for 2022, we are seeing improvement in local equities led by the junior market. This has been reflective of IPOs and individual investor sentiments towards the companies with growth. The withdrawal of the Disaster Risk Management Act in March, the withdrawal of the Disaster Risk Management Act in March should provide well-needed stimulus to the local economy, which should support earnings in all sectors. Despite the progress we have made since the onset of the pandemic in 2020, our research team cautions that seas ahead are still turbulent. We anticipate continued market volatility due to higher than targeted inflation and rising interest rates. This should lead to higher required rates of return, which should depress market multiples. The Russia-Ukraine war will continue to impact the price of oil and wheat, which will continue to weigh heavily on food and fuel prices. Already consumers are feeling the pinch, and we expect that this will continue towards the end of 2022 and possibly into 2023. High levels of global inflation should weigh heavily on the economy, impacting various sectors, one being the tourism sector, as major source markets are grappling with high inflation. The markets are bracing for a recession as the central banks face the complicated trade-off between containing price pressure and safeguarding growth. Now, I know that it sounds like a lot of doom and gloom. However, Sagicor Investments funds were designed to weather these storms. Investment in equities remains the proven means of growing wealth, and it should be the part of any well-diversified portfolio. Sagicor Select Funds, in particular, offers the most efficient means for investors to participate in the equities market, because by owning one stock, investors essentially are owning shares in a diverse range of companies that make up that particular index. A defensive or conservative strategy is recommended, with preference towards value stocks as opposed to growth stocks. The Sagicor Select Funds presents an opportunity for investors to stick to the core recommendations of holding these value stocks, but also giving you exposure to growth stocks as well. So investors are encouraged to stay invested, to speak with an investment advisor that will help you to determine the best course of action to suit your specific goals. Sagicor Investments, as fund manager for the Select Funds, remains committed to providing innovative investment solutions and management expertise to enable clients to create, grow, and preserve their wealth. The performance of Sagicor Investment remains strong in 2021 as our dedicated team navigates the effects of the pandemic We also continue to be the leading fund manager in Jamaica, with our Sigma funds holding the #1 position across many of its asset classes. And we maintain the leading position in brokerage in terms of the volume and value traded across the exchange. We also continue to equip our team and to do the necessary work to build on the strong foundation of the company. Ladies and gentlemen, I will now hand over to Jodianne Aries. Jodianne has direct responsibility for the day-to-day management of the select funds, and she's going to take us through the performance of the company for the year. Thank you.
Taro, good afternoon to everyone, board of directors, our auditors, representatives, and to you, our valued shareholders. So this presentation will pretty much discuss. Hi, I'm Jodianne Aries. I'm manager for the research unit at Sagicor Investments. Sorry. Removing. I think we're supposed to be seeing presentation. So I'm seeing it here, but I don't think everyone else is seeing it. Okay. All right. So the presentation, I'll just pretty much go over the performance for the fund in terms of dividend activity, any factors that would have affected performance, as well as an outlook for the economic conditions coming into 2022. So just as a means of jogging our memory, the company was started in 2019, and to date, 3 classes of shares have been issued, 2 of which are listed on the JSE main market, and that would be the Select F and Select MD. And the objective of these funds is to provide exposure to respective indices established by the JSE. So for performance, we'll start with the Select F, the Financial Select Fund. So if we look on the income side, we know that for 2021, Select Fund had a negative income of 108 million. And even though this was negative, it was still an improvement relative to 2020, when it is that we'd have felt that heavy impact of COVID-19 on asset prices. So this negative income was largely due to the fair value change of financial assets. So the fund constitutes companies that are listed on the stock exchange, and so when their prices would have fallen, then that would have had an impact on the Select F. However, when we look at specific to dividend income, we notice that there has been an increase there, and we want to recall that in 2020, BOJ, on a matter of being precautionary, would have issued guidelines that precluded deposit-taking institutions from making dividend payments. So that would have impacted the lower dividend payment that would have occurred in 2020. And so that would have resulted in somewhat of an increase in 2021 when those guidelines were revised or relaxed, and so they were able to make those payments. In terms of assets of the fund, so it's largely the financial assets that make up the fund. There's very little in terms of cash holdings, because the aim of the fund is to pay out as much cash in dividends, so we don't hold much cash. So it's really just the companies or the stocks that are in the fund that constitute majority, I think about 98% or more of the overall fund. But we also want to note that asset value has dipped from 2019, when we would have started the fund, and we are down to about, I think, just about 4 billion thereabout, and that would have just been reflective of the fall in asset prices relative to 2019 and 2020. So we want to look a bit in terms of the portfolio holdings as well as the index composition, just on the basis that the funds are required to track the indices on the stock exchange. So particularly the Select F is required to track the JSE Financial Index, which is established by the Jamaica Stock Exchange. So comparing in terms of index weighting to portfolio weighting, we do know that there is one company that we didn't have last year that we now have this year, and that would have been Guardian Holdings. So in 2021, Guardian Holdings was cross-listed on the Jamaica Stock Exchange, and as such, it became a part of the JSE Financial Index. And seeing that our mandate as the fund is to track the index, it meant that we had to buy into it. And so in order to do that buying, we would have sold on our positions in some of the other companies in order to make that purchase. We are not quite where we would have liked to be in terms of meeting the targets in terms of GHL holdings relative to index, but part of this is due to market conditions and the availability of the stock on the market. So this just speaks a little bit more to the acquisitions that were done in 2021. So at the start of the year, Key Insurance would have done a rights issue, and we would have participated, seeing that Key Insurance is also a part of the index. We would have participated in order to meet the index weighting, so the portfolio would have bought into it. We'd have also purchased GHL, Guardian Holdings Limited, and we would have done a reduction in some positions for Sagicor Group, Scotia, NCB, JMMB, Panjam, as well as Barita. Once we would have done we'd have sold some of our Barita shares in order to gain shares in GHL. There was an APO for Barita, and as such, in order to get back closer to index weighting, we purchased into Barita in the third quarter. In terms of the NAV performance, so looking now at the NAV per share, and this is just a graphical representation of the NAV relative to the index. So we look at how it is that the index is performing, as well as how it is that the NAV, which would represent the fund that we are holding, the Select F, the NAV for that, how that is performing. And we note that we're going one-to-one for about the first 4 months of the year. And thereafter, once there was the cross-listing of Guardian, it took us a little bit of a time to gain exposure, and as such, the tracking would have widened between that of the index and the fund. Once it is that we would have gained shares in Guardian, we noticed that tracking got a little bit closer. And so based on the fact that we still need to get a little bit more exposure to Guardian, which is a large holding, once that is done, then there will be a little bit more one-to-one tracking of the index. So now we are moving over to Select Manufacturing. And so this is a little bit different, or I guess it's the opposite of the financial. So for income side, for Select Manufacturing and Distribution Fund, we'd have had an income of about $900 million, and this was positive relative to a negative last year. And this just reflects the higher price of the stocks within the fund. And specific to dividend income, we also noticed that dividend income in 2021 was higher than that of 2020. And we'd imagine that within a period of COVID, there were companies that would have reserved dividend payment just out of a nature of caution. And so, whatever was reserved, they realized in 2021 that things were a little bit of a recovery, and they were able to pay a little bit more in 2021, which worked in the favor of the fund. In terms of assets, we noticed that assets of the fund is increasing. So relative to the end of 2020 as well as the end of 2019, the assets of the Select Manufacturing Fund has increased, and this largely reflects the fact that it is comprised of financial assets, which would have been manufacturing and distribution companies that are listed, are held in the fund, and once we saw price appreciation there, that would have impacted the assets. So looking in terms of holdings, so we want to do that comparison again between what is in the portfolio and what is in the index, just on the basis that we are required to track the JSE Manufacturing and Distribution Index. And so what we're seeing in terms of tracking is that there's quite a bit more one-to-one tracking on this side. So you notice that there isn't much difference between the weighting in terms of the portfolio and that of the index. So there's quite a bit of, I guess, less error in terms of the tracking for Select MD. And just to give you that, in terms of our acquisition for 2021, Tropical Battery would have been one of those companies that did an IPO in 2020, I think it was, or 2019. And so particularly with IPOs, sometimes it takes a little bit of a time for the fund to get full exposure to those stocks, because the allocation that you receive at an IPO may not be to the fullness that you'd like. and so it takes a little bit of a time for the fund to do that acquisition. So we're able to get some more tropical battery shares in Q1. Additionally, we were a little bit overweight in terms of our position in GK at the start of the year, and so we reduced our position there and got additional exposure in some other companies that we were a little bit low in. There was also the detail APO, and we would have participated in that. Jamaica Producers we'd have bought into. This was one of the companies that is not as easy to acquire on the market, and there was an opportunity for us to buy into it, and so we decided to take that opportunity, seeing that it is not one that is very liquid on the market, and we'd have made a purchase for Jamaica Producers. Looking at our NAV performance, just in terms of our graphical performance, so when it is that you look at the NAV per share relative to the index performance, you notice this is quite one-to-one in terms of the performance for January 2021 to December 2021, which would indicate that the fund itself is fully invested in the companies within the manufacturing and distribution sector, and so that would give us a better tracking. And now for the good stuff, dividend payment. So in 2021, Select F would have paid out around 86.7 million in dividend to shareholders, while Select MD paid out 69.5 million. And this was done via two payments, one in July and one in December. You'll note that when it is that you're looking at Select MD, the first payment was higher than the second payment, and this really reflected that this was the first time shareholders would have been receiving a dividend for Select MD. The fund was listed towards the end of 2019, and then we would have hit upon COVID in 2020. And just as a matter of being prudent, payments were withheld just because there's a level of caution that needed to go into a period of time with uncertainty. And so, seeing that it was the first dividend payment, so we'd have been carrying cash from 2019 and 2020 was a little bit higher for the first payment. However, when it is that we look at Select F, we notice this is a reverse. And so you're noticing that the second payment is higher than the first payment. And this would reflect the fact that I mentioned earlier that the BOJ, just out of an abundance of caution, would have restricted deposit-taking institutions, and those would have been the financial companies that have banks, from making dividend payments in 2020. And as such, they would have held those dividend payments just on caution, precautionary. And once it is that the BOJ saw that the economy was fairly resilient throughout the pandemic, they would have relaxed those measures. And what we found was that those companies would have then paid a higher dividend in 2021. And so you'd see that in the Q2 and Q3 dividend payments. And so we're able to make a higher dividend payments in December than we were able to in July. All right, so we just want to take a little bit of a look on factors that would have impacted the performance of the fund. And so we look at the economic environment as well as we do a little bit in terms of market outlook. So in terms of the economic environment, we started to see recovery in 2021 coming off of the pandemic in 2020. And we'd have noted that the Jamaican economy would have recorded growth of around 4.6% for 2021. And this would have been reflected in terms of the improvement that we noticed in the performance. So when it is that we looked at income for 2021 for both funds, they are higher than they would have been in 2020. And part of that is reflective of the general market conditions. Price appreciation in manufacturing stocks was strong, and this would have explained in terms of unrealized gains impacting the income for the fund. Looking at the market relative to pre-pandemic. All right, so let me just back up a bit. So when it is that you look at the manufacturing companies, you notice that you're seeing quite a bit of a high percentage change in terms of prices. So that is a little bit higher. So I think the highest for the manufacturing is 405%, whereas on the financial side, the highest is around 98%. So we realized that in 2021, the manufacturing companies did perform way better than the financial companies, and that would have been reflected in the performance of the funds. in general market conditions, so if it is that we were to look at where the Jamaica Stock Exchange, the combined index was at the end of December 2019, which would have been what we call pre-pandemic, and we are to compare it to where it is at now, we realize that we're not back at pre-pandemic levels. And so there's still amounts of recovery that needs to happen. So you'd have noticed that there would have been a steep dip in March 2020, which would have been the impact of COVID-19 at that onset, and we'd have started to make some amount of recovery. So we're heading back to that very 2019 point, and then we can say we're back at pre-pandemic levels, but we still have some groundwork to do. In terms of performance for the year, junior market stocks did quite well. They were around 30% in terms of year-to-date performance upwards. We know that for financial companies, they were down, and that would have impacted in terms of the performance of the financial fund. And for the manufacturing and distribution fund, that would have been up about 14.4%. So we just want to touch a bit in terms of outlook. And so macroeconomic indicators are expected to continue on trend for 2022. And so one of the great themes that we have been hearing this year is, inflation and interest rates. And so we anticipate that inflation is expected to continue to be at elevated levels for the rest of 2022. And this will have some impact in terms of how it is that markets will respond. And so you can imagine that for inflation, companies react a little bit different. And so financial companies' response to inflation is a little bit different from that of the manufacturing companies. And so we'll continue to see what would have played out towards the latter half of 2021, continuing in 2022. But on the positive side, there are still good news. Unemployment rates as at January was 6.2, and that would have been one of the lowest, I think the lowest recorded. And so that shows some amount of optimism in terms of labor market conditions. And when it is that we have a fuller labor force and persons are employed, then they are actively participating in the economy, and that would result in terms of demand and helpful towards companies such as manufacturing and distribution. In terms of the stock market, we do know that for Q1, we noticed that earnings for some of these companies are definitely improving. And so even though we are still in challenging times, we are starting to see improvements in terms of the performance of companies on the stock exchange. And we expect that some of this would continue just on the basis that companies have gone through 2 years of a pandemic. And so they are able to better withstand and prepare for challenges that may come, even though looking ahead, it is still quite a bit of a sticky situation in terms of the uncertainty that lies and the possibility that there could be some amount of economic downturn. But overall, this would have been what we are expecting for 2021. And just to reiterate that our CEO would have said that we are expecting, our recommendation remains to stick to value, and that our select funds present an opportunity to stick with value companies while still having some amount of exposure on a lower end to growth companies. And that's it from me, Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Nunes and Ms. Aries. Those were excellent presentations. Timely, comprehensive, and informative. 2 words coming out of the investment manager's address that I'd like us to just reflect on. Stay invested. Although market volatility still exists, Sagicor Select Funds Limited is designed to weather the storm. Equities are still the proven means for growing wealth. And by owning one stock of Sagicor Select Funds Limited, both the financial and the manufacturing and distribution. By owning one, you own a diverse range of companies. Recall that the company has kept its investments in the major financial institutions, and some of the largest manufacturing and distribution companies across the Caribbean. So, having heard from the auditors and our fund managers, I now invite shareholders to comment or ask questions on the reports or the business of the company. Questions may also be asked of the auditors in relation to the conduct of the audit, content of the audit reports, accounting policies adopted by the company, and the independence of the auditor in carrying out the audit. The floor is now opened for comments or questions. And may I ask all persons who have questions or comments on the reports to identify themselves for the purposes of the record. To my left and to your right, we have a microphone, and we invite you to go to the microphone to ask your questions. So we could have a queue right in the middle. Mr. Staple, you could. Please go ahead.
Madam Chair. Madam Chair, good afternoon. To your board of directors, good afternoon. And to fellow shareholders, good afternoon. We want to give God thanks for bringing us here this evening, because with what is happening, we have to give him thanks. And we ask him to conduct our meeting, to be with us, and to guide our thoughts and our actions. Madam Chair, my first question, page 37. Why is fair value having this significant impact on our P&L? Am I correct in saying that our majority shareholders are creating this impact by initially taking up 80+% of the initial offering and leaving our poor minority shareholders with the belief that there will be future share price increases? Poor shareholders. I'm saying, take it to the court, just as how you take the meeting to the court, and the court give you permission to have this virtual and other terminology that they have used so that minority shareholders are exempted. We give you thanks, Sagicor, for inviting us this afternoon, and we appreciate what you have done. Poor shareholders, because the majority shareholders have all the shares and they dictate what price they want, and the poor shareholders go into their pocket and take out the last farthing and invest in them. Do not do it, shareholders. Do not do it. Don't invest any more money in them, because they are a Why is
that the end of your question?
Mr. Shareholder,
Oh, you're not through.
Why is it that this is happening? It's a pure manipulation of the numbers, pure manipulation. And we will not be getting anything further than what is happening because of the manipulative way things are being done. They are using technology to manipulate the numbers, to give them what they feel like getting, and the poor shareholders are left in the balance. Explain to me why fair value is taking such an important part in the loss of this company.
So, Mr. Staple, to just address that question, So,
I would like an answer for this question as I ask the question. I don't want any putting off the question. Answer the questions as they are being asked.
Mr. Staple and shareholders, so in response to that question, recall that this fund invests in equities on the Jamaican Stock Exchange. And we're all aware that with the onset of COVID, the market took a nosedive. And so when you look at the change in the value, what it was the previous year to the end of December 2021, you have that change in the fair value of the equities. So what I should point out is that in 2021, there was a big improvement over 2020 with the onset of COVID. So you would note the change in fair value for 2021 was 230 million for the Financial Select Fund, as opposed to 1.6 billion in 2020. So I hope I'm very clear, and similar to what I described for Select Fund, the same would apply for M&D, except though in 2021 there was a positive. The fair value change was 791 million positive. Again, an improvement over 2020. So the point is, I hope it's clear that, I think Mr. Staple, was not giving an accurate picture, because this has purely to do with the market value of the equities.
Madam Chair, let us stop using this foolishness about COVID-19. COVID-19 is putting serious money into the big man's pocket and creating a problem for us, the small. Stop using COVID-19 as an excuse for doing what we are doing. Stop using it.
Thanks, Mr. Staple. Do you have another question?
What's that?
No, I was asking if you have another question.
Yes.
Please go on.
Page 55, note 6. We have invested in 1.1 billion, or 27.9% of NCB Financial Group shares. We should eliminate this as quickly as possible, because NCB is on the verge of collapse. NCB is on the verge of collapse. They have not paid a dividend for the last year. And all what they are saying is that they have to increase their asset base. Foolishness. Foolishness. All what is happening is that the big people in NCB are holding their shares and getting rid of them at this price. And we, the poor shareholders, are left with the bag, carrying the bag. And I would like to say, shareholders, do not invest any more money in this particular institution. And I'm advising Sagicor to sell their shares as quickly as possible and get out of the market for NCB shares. Madam Chair, minority shareholders are suffering and continue to suffer because of the big shareholders. They don't come to meetings. Check it. All these are minority shareholders. They don't even have a proxy coming to these meetings. And I'm saying, Madam,
You're sure about that,
I don't see
Mr. Stables?
I don't see any record of that.
We have proxies, but go ahead with your question, please.
I'm saying we should divest or sell our shares in NCB and get out of the market as quickly as possible.
So, Mr. Staple, thanks for that. If you have other questions, we can take them.
One last question.
Mr. Staple, Mr. Staple.
Yes.
Yes, you can come back, but let us
One
allow.
last question.
You will be allowed, Mr. Staple.
I hear you, I respect your position. But let me finish my questions and I will not come back on this page. Question 3, page 68. Why is it that these fees and remuneration are so high, even with the impact of COVID, which is an international fraud and driving fear into people's lives? Why is it that these continues to be so high? Why? These fees and remuneration. Page 68.
Page 68.
I respect my auditor. I respect him. A man of technology, a man who uses the professionalism in his presentation and in his work. I respect you, Mr. Price Waterhouse.
Thank you, sir.
And I ask you to continue using your professionalism so that we can survive as minority shareholders. Madam Chair,
Thank you,
my
Mr.
question,
Staple.
why is it that these remuneration and fees are so high?
In
Why?
which fee are you referring to, Mr.
Page
Staple?
68.
What on which one? Which expense on page 68?
When we look at legal fees, for example, moving
Okay.
from 4
4.2 million to 5.1.
million.
Okay.
Why?
All right. Ms. Pantry, do you want to take that? Miss Aries, you have the name of a celebrity.
I'm not hearing.
So in relation to expenses, in 2021, what would have happened is that there would have been dividend payments, and so there's quite a bit of a cost associated with making dividend payment because quite a bit of our shareholders are not giving us an account, so we still have to mail checks out, and that would have been part of what would have caused an increase in terms of professional fees for 2021. But overall, in terms of expenses, though, we want to know that there wasn't much of an increase in 2021 relative to 2020, and this would have been because management fees and other fees were renegotiated downwards. And so we'd want to know that these fees are calculated as a percentage in terms of the NAV, and the NAV for select manufacturing actually improved, and fees were not as high if it is that we did not do those renegotiations. So there was effort made on the part of the board to have fees be not as exorbitant as it could have been in 2021.
Why these management fees for moving from 11 million to 12 million?
So management fee is a structure of the fund. So how it is that you pay an investment manager to do the day-to-day. So whether it is that you're rebalancing or purchasing, making dividend payments, preparing reports and stuff is part of the function of the management team. And there's a fee that is charged in relation to the overall assets of the fund. And so because assets would have improved for manufacturing and distribution, we notice a bit of an uptick in terms of the fees paid for management fees.
Thank you very much, Ms. Aries. Thank you so much, Mr. Staple. And just to
These guys have nothing to offer us. Nothing.
Just to pick up on something that Ms. Aries said in relation to the dividend payments by checks. You know, it's extremely expensive. And so we want to encourage shareholders to complete mandates, to have their dividends paid electronically, you know, to your bank account instead of by checks.
Yeah,
Yes, please go ahead.
Livingston Young.
Afternoon, Mr. Young.
Before I go in the financial statement, hear me out a little bit there, please. Like how the continued devaluation of the Jamaica dollars, you guys do export, right? I want to manage like how the value of the Jamaican dollars and the manufacture. I want to manage. Can you make a conversation?
Okay, so in terms of the fund itself, so we're just invested in companies that would do manufacturing.
Yeah.
Sorry. So the fund itself is invested in companies that would participate in terms of exporting. So it wouldn't be necessarily the fund's responsibility to do that sort of management for the manufacturing companies. So the fund pretty much would buy companies on the stock exchange. So like, for example, GK or Caribbean producers, Jamaica producers. And so they would be the ones that are responsible for making those day-to-day decisions in terms of how it is that they manage in terms of the devaluation of the dollar, and not necessarily the fund. Select funds itself, because they just buy shares into those companies.
You buy some good one then, which is Caribbean producer, CPJ.
Yes.
You said they nearly about over 100%. Cause
Yes,
them-
yes,
them are
400
the
and,
people.
yes,
Yeah.
they did.
And Jamaica producers are the next one, you know. Cause them are going on good things.
Right.
Yeah, all right. You can turn to page 49. Note A, risk management. Capital and reserve, a tabulation to etiquette, holding of fund 2021, 2020. I see you have your 5% in 2020, 5% increase. That have one side now, so I have 20 million, 20, yeah, million, yeah, you're right. The next one have 5% in 2020, have 10% decrease in 2021. You can explain to me on 2021 and 22, have 472,000. You can give me a little explanation, please. 2021 and 2022, 2020.
So, good afternoon again. So what this disclosure is saying is if all the shares that the company owns, if the price changes by 5%, the total value of the fund will go up by 204 million or go down by 204 million if it decreases by 5%. In prior year, we had used 10%, but because of the change in the market, we used 5% for increase and decrease in 2021.
For all in our funds.
No, man. So the GK shares, so if the price of GK shares go down by 5% or go up by 5% or any other share that the company owns, the overall value of the fund would increase by this figure or decrease by that figure if it goes down by the 5%.
Yeah, all right. I can turn to page 71. Note. Let's see, note. Must not know there. You there? You see the note I say 8 here. It say gain and losses of financial assets of fair value through profit. You can in 2021 and 20. Can we explanation it from, please? Dividend income, interest and expense. Dividend income and expense. Right now, 766.
No, which number are you referring to? No, I know I'm on page 71, but which particular line are you interested in?
Cash flow from operating activity.
Right.
Dividend and income, interest, expense, and expense and dividends.
Right, but which particular figure you want an expenditure for?
Gains and losses on financial assets.
Okay, so during the year, the fund sold some of its investment.
Pardon me?
The fund sold some of its shares. Remember they told you that they sold some shares to buy other shares?
Yeah.
So they made a profit of 9.6 million in 2021. Whereas in 2020, they made a loss of 8.3 million when they sold some shares based on the market conditions.
Look at this. Change in operation assets.
Right.
Liability. You have an increase and decrease of financial assets. Give an explanation.
Right, so that big figure there is the change in the value of the investment based on the quoted prices on the stock exchange. So that's the overall fund. So all the shares, when you revalue them at the end of 2021 and you compare them to 2022, the value of the thing has gone up by 866 million. Whereas in prior year, it decreased by 568.
Look at this. It jump down.
I'm not seeing what what am I looking at? Remember, I'm not beside you.
Related parties. The jump down right within tax,
Right.
withholding in sources.
Mm-hmm.
Interest receivable. The dash right here.
Right. So there was no tax withheld during 2021 compared to 2020.
Yeah.
Tax is normally withheld on interest earned.
Yeah, we know that. We know
Right. So there was none for 2021. So that's why that is a dash.
All right, you can turn to last one, page 89. Related parties. Loan and loan. 2021, 2020.
Right.
Cash movements. Payments in principles. You could have an explanation on it.
Right. So in 2020, there was a loan given to the fund so that the fund could purchase some investment. They didn't have the cash at the time?
To this.
Huh?
To this one.
Yeah, man. So the manufacturing fund got a loan from Sagicor Investments of 70 million. 70 million. Yeah. And they repaid it during the year. So at the end of the year, they didn't owe anything.
Oh, December 31st?
Right. So at December 31st, 2020, you notice that it's a nil. So they got the money during the course of 2020, and it was repaid before the end of the financial year.
So the breakdown here, so under related 23 something.
No, because remember, Sagicor Investment is a related party because they're the manager of the fund. So we have to disclose any transaction between Sagicor and the fund. So Sagicor Investment lent them the money, and they paid back the money.
All right. Thanks, Alex.
Sure, no problem.
Thank you, Mr.
Young.
Mr. Young. Okay, so we're going to take a couple more questions or comment. All right, just before you do so, I understand that there are persons from the overflow room who have questions. I'm going to invite you to join us in the main room at this time so that we can take your questions right after this.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I am Dividend Reynolds.
Afternoon, Ms. Reynolds.
A retired teacher, a poor retired teacher. Take my little money. I don't understand all the things that you people talking. All I understand is that in 2019, I take my little money, the 400,000, because I saw this advertise the IPO, $1 per share. I said, this cannot lose anything, because it's just $1. It's supposed to be going up, not down. Now, my 400,000, instead of double, it is 300,000. That's all I understand. I come into this thing. I don't even give my grandchildren them lunch money when they're asking me. Well, I give them take away my 100,000.
It's
I have another thing with Sagicor. I went up there. Them gone with 30,000.
oh, okay, Ms. Reynolds. All right, so let us address the question that you asked or you know, what you shared in terms of the value of your shares, your investment. Jody, you want to comment on that? Could we just tone down a bit with the noise so that we can focus?
Yes, so relative to 2019, there would have been a fall in stock prices right across the board. And so we'd have seen that whether it is that you were invested in Select MD, there would have been a drop in terms of the price. And that's just reflective of what's happening in terms of market condition. In terms of the fund, in terms of our role as investment managers, we have been doing promotion on the fund. If it is that you compare the actual value. So if it is that we took all the assets, all of the companies that Select MD has bought into, and we were to split those up amongst all of the shares, it would be actually higher at this present time than the dollar. But it is just that in terms of market, the market decides, at what price it would like to purchase the stock. So even though it is valued about $1.10, our market has decided that, they are willing to pay less than that for it. And that would have been what would have caused an impact in terms of the share price. So in terms of the value of your holdings from 2019 to now would have been impacted by the overall, what we're seeing in terms of the market. So, it's just really market conditions. And we also have to remember that equity is not necessarily a short-term investment. It's something that you go into to be able to weather out storms. Right, so that would have been what would have resulted in the fall in prices. Not so much in terms of Sagicor itself taking any funds from anybody. It's just the market in terms of what other investors are willing to pay for the stock.
Okay, thank you, Jodian. So Ms. Reynolds, thanks for that question. It's not where we would want it to be, but we can acknowledge that there has been improvement over 2020. Over 2020, yes, Ms. Reynolds. Look at it. And as the market continues to recover, so will the share price. Next question. So after the two persons from the overflow room, and then we have some questions that we received online. And all the other questions, I'm going to ask you to submit to the Secretariat, and we will answer them afterwards.
No, not online. We got it on email.
Madam Chair, shareholders, pleasant good afternoon. My name is Lanzel Bloomfield. I have some questions, and I have a serious comments. First of all, I would like to thank you all for the opportunity to be here in presence to attend this meeting. I'm a shareholder in the Select Fund, MD, and in Financial. I'm also a minority shareholder in Panjam. And I would like to start my comments by saying, when many of us voted at the meetings for companies to have their meetings electronically, we did not vote to shut out the minority shareholders. We did not vote to bring an end to shareholders giving up their rights to attend and vote for their directors and get to participate in the process. So what has been happening over the last 2.5 years, and whereas I have seen a report being published or became public on RGR that over 60% of the stock market companies wanted to go electronics and shut out the shareholders. From this company has been listed on the stock market. This is the first opportunity for us to attend a meeting. I have bought the shares and sold it. Each time when I see the AGM come around, going virtual. And so we neither have equipment, nor Wi-Fi, nor anything to participate in the streaming. How can that be? So I really implore you today, going forward, I am, this year, December, last year, I will be 60. So I'm one of the oldest person apart from Mr. Staple. And I have taken my vaccine, and I am here today. So what are we afraid of?
So, Mr. Bloomfield, thanks for that. And based on what has been said in the room, apparently there are others who share your view. But recall now that COVID came about in 2020, which would have been these funds, and because of that, we had the Disaster Risk Management Act. And so we could not gather like this. You had a limit of, I think, 10 persons. So it would not have been possible. But I believe Sagicor Select Funds is probably the first company that is having a face-to-face AGM. So I think, that deserves some amount of credit. So it just had to do with COVID and the restrictions. So do you have another question?
Yes, I do, but let me just finish this comment. Let me just correct you. Sagicor is not the first company that is having first face-to-face AGM. And when the government, I've been following the Disaster Risk Management Act, right? And when the government announced that you people can have meeting with up to 50 persons in the room, you decided against it and went virtual and locked us out of the meeting, right? And it seems as if all of the very powerful top 10 shareholders in the company decided to lock themselves away, like what used to happen before many of us were given an opportunity to buy stocks on the stock exchange. They used to lock themselves away in Pegasus and Wyndham. So I am saying to you people now, going forward, because there's no point in buying shares in a company if you can't face-to-face with your directors and managers and question them. So I don't want to labor the point, but I am very grateful to have been here today, right? And going forward, I hope that this will be, and you have bigger rooms there that you can put everybody in. Don't bother with the foolishness. You can walk with your vaccination card. Because when you line up at U.S. Embassy, you're going to go with your vaccination card. So we can't lock out our people.
All right, thank you,
right.
Thank you, Mr. Bloomfield.
Question, page 37, expenses, under expenses. What account for this transaction cost of $8.7 million? On page 37. Under expenses, there is a transaction cost of $8.7 million. What accounts for that?
Okay, so the transaction cost of $8.1 million actually reflects the purchase of Guardian Holding. So when the Guardian Holding would have cross-listed on the Jamaica Stock Exchange in about May of 2021, seeing that it is now form part of the index, the Select Fund Financial would have been then required in order to keep up with its mandate to purchase into Guardian Holding. And so how it is a fund is that you want to look at it based on weightings relative to an index. So because if Guardian Holding is added, it means that the other companies, their weightings would then fall and Guardian would then increase. And so we had to purchase some amount of shares in Guardian. And with purchasing shares, there's always some amount of cost associated with that, brokerage fees and JCSD fees as well. And as such, that would have reflected that. That $8.1 million would have been those costs to purchase shares in Guardian Holding, as well as to sell shares in other companies.
Okay, same page 37, under expenses. There is a line item of $12.711 million, management fees to fund manager. Please explain what this is all about.
Okay, so how it is that in terms of the select funds, so similar to any other company, there is somebody who is at the head and managing the company. So for select funds, there's our investment manager, which will be Sagicor Investment. And so they're responsible in terms of making sure that things are tracking the index as they should. So if it is that things are needed to be bought, they will do the calculation to say how much it is to be bought. And so there's a fee that is charged to do that. But I also want to point out that relative to 2020, that there was actually a decline in terms of the management fees to fund manager. So it is not as high as it was and this was due to the fact that there was renegotiation in terms of the percentage paid to the fund manager.
So, Sagicor, the group, establishes these funds, and then you create a management structure that you are paying over this huge sum of money to.
Well, based on how it is in terms of the international market, it isn't a difference from how it is to typical ETFs within the US market, which would have been the aim of the fund. So you wanted to be able to provide shareholders, investors with an opportunity to buy into companies at a bit of a lower cost. So particularly when it is that you look at, if it is to buy into Select MD, if it is that you were to recreate that fund on your own, you would have to individually buy GK, Seprod, Carreras, about 31 stocks, and so that would have been a high transaction cost. And so ETFs, which is what Sagicor Select Funds is aimed at doing, presents an opportunity for investors to make that sort of investment in a little bit of a cheaper way. And the funds, in terms of the fee that are charged by the investment manager, are similar to what it is charged in terms of other international markets.
Yes, madam, but you're not dealing with an external fund manager. You're dealing with an internal fund manager, the same company.
Yes, which is why we're able to renegotiate fees at a lower, and so we had that.
So this fee, I am taking it from you today now, that the fee will get lower.
Well, depends, because if the fund because we want the prices of the stocks that we hold to get higher. So if those get higher, it means that the fund itself, in terms of value, it becomes larger, and so the fee, in terms of a dollar amount, could be higher. But in terms of a percentage of the value of the fund, that will remain within a particular band, as was indicated at the prospectus.
Okay, page 55, investments. Madam Chair, why is it that you're still retaining SSL Venture Capital in your portfolio when this company has never performed and the net book value of this company has been in the red for decades now?
All right, so based on how it is that the fund is just pretty much tracking what it is that is within the index by the JSE. And so you would get exposure to all financial companies. Particularly for SSL, I do know that I think since start of the year, when you look at their year-to-date performance, or when you looked at their performance in 2021, they would have actually seen an improvement of 64.9% in terms of share price. So there was actually some gain to shareholders based on SSL VC investment in 2021.
Yes, but the share price is only one component of the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is it's a company that has never performed. And when I looked at the share price of a company, it tells me one thing. But when I dig down or drill down further, and I look on the assets of the company, I looked on their I look on their net book value. I looked on their liabilities. I look on what the company does for a living. It has not been, as a matter of fact, that company has been dead. So why do you still retain it with a superficial value? Because that is what it is. If you were to do the calculation, it's a superficial value that you're looking on. It's not a real value.
So, Mr. Bloomfield, thanks for that question. So, as you know, the fund tracks the index. Jamaica Stock Exchange has an index of all the companies that are in the financial fund and also the manufacturing and distribution. So, the objective of Sagicor Select Funds is to invest in those companies and to track the index. So really, we would expect to have exposure, or said another way, to have in our portfolio all the companies that make up the fund. So, in a nutshell, that's one of the reasons. But just to note that the percentage of the portfolio is 0.05. So of the total portfolio of the financial index, financial fund, this represents a small part. And it's only because it's a part of the fund why we have an investment in it. All right? I hope that answers your question.
I understand what you're saying, madam, but it doesn't address the problem. And in the future, please try and, because this has, SSL has never made the index, the JC index.
All right.
It has never performed.
All right,
so
point taken.
That is like you're buying an arse out at Cayman Islands, and you know it will run dead last. My last
All right, Mr. Bloomfield.
My last question. I've heard the teacher, the former teacher, made mention of something, and it concerned me greatly. So this last question, I would like it to be answered very honestly. Select MD issued shares on the market. It's some 3.8 billion. Billion, not million. Select Financial shares, issued shares on the market is 5.1 billion. Madam Chair, not many of us are mathematically inclined. And I have noticed a lot of foolishness being done by stock market companies. You want to raise a certain number of capital or a certain amount of capital. And so you decide to issue billions of shares on the market for which you're not going to be able to earn sufficiently to pay the teacher a reasonable dividend on the money, because in order to be able to earn a good amount of money from the dividend, 0.000 how much, she's a teacher, I don't know if that is 1/4 cent. When I was going to school, we didn't do 1/4 cents. You understand? So you have these billions of shares, which makes no sense, because unless most of us can own upward of 1 million shares in this room, you're basically getting nothing. Mathematically, using basic maths, you don't have to use algebra and algorithm, and, right? Unless you have 1 million shares, you will not be getting anything on your money. Exactly. But if you go to the market and you put 1 billion share, not 5, not 6, right? Market capitalization can take care for the rest with that, so the share price can go up because people want the share. You created a need, right? And in addition, when you earn, right, because while they say the sky is the limit, you don't have this unfettered access to a whole lot of money. You're in a small marketplace in Jamaica. So you would have been able to pay a decent dividend on the number of shares that you have issued, right? But if you put out already 6 billion shares, the first time you go to the market, 5 billion shares, there's no fight to get the shares. Why would I fight to get the shares and pay $10 for it?
Thanks, Mr. Bloomfield. So remind us, what is the question?
So I am saying to you, why is it that for both companies, you have put so much shares on the market in the initial stages? It's not like you have put a couple million shares and then later on you have to do a stock split because people want to get the shares, right? There is no way any of us are going to be able to benefit from these shares because of the share volume that is out there.
All right, Ms. Aries.
Okay, so let me try and stick with the theme. So remember that for these funds, in terms of how it is that they're able to pay dividend, it means that they receive dividend from the companies that they would have bought. So, for example, Select MD would have bought shares in GK, they would have bought shares in Seprod, Carreras. So when these companies pay dividend, they would receive that income and then they'd pay it back to shareholders. So in terms of if it is that you want to then have the ability to be able to have, as you would have pointed out, in terms of a sizable amount of dividend income, it means that your fund that you're buying into had to be of a particular size. And that would have then factored into the decision to making the number of shares that were issued, just on the basis that you would have wanted a fund that would have been of a sizable amount, so that when it is that the fund bought into these companies, the dividend income that the fund received would have been sizable, so that the payments could go. So it is on the two sides in terms of dividend, just on the basis of how this fund operates.
Both the dividend and market appreciation. A lot of people in the stock market seems to realize the only way you can have market appreciation or capital appreciation is until you are paying a sensible dividend. But if you float too many shares on the market, where's the dividend going to come from? You're operating in a limited space. And there can be you can't find the money. So even if GK will pay you 70 cents on the dollar, SSL not paying you anything. Some other companies put too many shares out on the market, so them start with this foolishness by 0.000, right? like you doing there is a match that I was taught in school. I know I don't even know how to do it. One with a whole heap of zero and points all over the place.
I think we get your point, Mr. Bloomfield.
So there is no way. You want to raise the capital now.
Yes.
It's just like how Wicton Wind Farm and the government put some stocks there and tell the country, we want a whole lot of Jamaicans to participate. Participate in what? The Jamaicans who are participating can't get anything because they put too many shares on the market at one time. So even if you buy 25,000 shares in the company, by the time you pay the little money that you're able to make, and you pay 0.00026 of 25, you end up with $1. Can't even change the check.
Yes. Mr.
It doesn't
Bloomfield,
make any sense.
your comments are noted, and you would have heard what Ms. Harris said, but your comments are noted, and we will review the board and the management team some of the comments that you have made.
Thank you very much.
We are running a bit.
So the quarterly financials for Q1, which would have been the March 2022 quarter, those were uploaded on the Jamaica Stock Exchange website within timeline that would have been allotted to do so. So I know that those are out. In terms of rebalancing, there was no rebalancing done during the first quarter of this year, and part of that would have been because of market conditions in terms of availability of shares, particularly for Select MD. There would have been the cross-listing of Massey Holding, and so that would have been something that the fund would then have been required to purchase in. But what happens when it is that these companies are cross-listed is that the volume of stocks needed are not available on the market right away. And so it takes some time in terms of the fund manager in terms of to gain these shares. So there was no rebalancing done in 2022 for the March quarter.
Okay, thank you. I think
Sorry, if you allow me one more question. Thank you, Madam Chair. Will Select funds rebalance less amid this heightened volatility and preserve cash to adjust for upcoming public offers? Will you be buying into the dollar financial IPO for Select funds? It's a two-part question. You want me to repeat it?
I think the first one was, will we be considering doing less rebalancing?
Less rebalancing.
Okay. So in that regard, as we'd have mentioned earlier, that for when it is that Guardian cross-listed, we spent about $8.1 million in terms of transaction costs. So rebalancing does come at a cost to the fund, and it is something that we do look into and try to not do as much rebalancing so that the costs or the fund expenses are not as high. So when it is that we're considering to rebalance, we do take into consideration the costs associated with rebalance, how best it is that we can reduce those costs. So going forward has been our practice is that we take it case by case whenever there's a need to rebalance, and it would have to be on the basis that we consider the costs associated with doing so. I think there was a question about going into
Dollar financial
Right.
IPO.
Right. So as with all other companies, once it is a part of one of the respective sector indices, so in this case, Dollar Financial should be a part of the JSE Financial Index. So once it is that we would have received that communication confirming same from the Jamaica Stock Exchange, then at that point we'd seek to gain exposure once it is that they have it as a part of the index.
Thank you. Thanks. All right, we are really now pressed for time. I'm going to allow, but it needs to be very quick, right? And I see someone else at the back. And remember, if you don't get your questions answered at today's AGM, we will seek to answer them after this. So you will get your questions answered. So only 2 and very quick. Please go ahead.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, we respect you know, for being invited to the meeting and some. We have things about this IPO. See, I always ask this question all the while. When we already know, say boy, a dollar coming on the market already. As a minority of the shareholders, we have said to them, say, we already know, say boy, Sagicor financial something. But we need to keep a briefing, shareholder briefing, but we could know all about what them going about. You understand? Because some of them come on the market years, I want to pump more money in the company, and you can't go because they're not doing nothing at all. So they need to keep a shareholder briefing that we can have an understanding what they come, because some of them not nothing as SSS Capital Ventures. You understand what I say? They need to keep a briefing before we put them on the market, because some of them, make no sense. A business we are doing is a business. You understand? You need to do better, man. You understand?
All right. Thanks for that comment. Last question, comment? Please use the microphone and introduce yourself. Thank you.
Pat McLeod, investor in the Manufacturing and Distribution Fund. My question was fairly straightforward. It seems like trustees' fees tripled in the 1 year from 2020 to 2021.
Which page are you looking at?
Still on page 37.
37.
Under expenses, it says trustees'
Financial
fees.
fund. The 3 million.
3 million.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's what
So
in 2020 it was 1 million, and in 2021 it was 3 million.
3 million. So in 2021 we would have had 2 dividend payments, and that would have contributed to the increase. But apart from that, we do pay fees to JCSD as well. So it would be those normal fees in addition to those additional fees for the dividend payments.
Not quite following, but thank you.
So So you were not following, you said. But what was outlined was the reason why 2021 was higher than 2020, which I believe was your question.
Right, yeah, I mean, I understand the expenses go up, but it's tripled in an environment where...
Right, but recall now we had 2 dividend payments in 2021. All right? And remember, we spoke about the mandates earlier, for shareholders to have those mandates completed for the electronic payments to be done. All right? Thank you so much for your participation. So we continue with the rest of the AGM now. And as there are no further questions, may we have a motion that the audited accounts of the company for the year ended 31 December 2021, together with the reports of the directors and auditors thereon, be and are hereby adopted. Do I have a proposal? Mr. Staple, proposal? Thank you. And I think I saw Latifa, thank you so much. Those in favor? Aye. Any against? So the ayes have it, and I declare the motion carried. The next agenda item deals with the ratification of dividends. During 2021, the company paid 2 interim dividends, and the meeting is being asked to adopt the following resolution to ratify and declare the payment of the interim dividends as final for 2021. The resolution reads, that, as recommended by the directors, the interim dividends paid on July 2, 2021 and December 16, 2021 be and are hereby declared as final for the year ended December 31, 2021. I now invite a shareholder to propose the resolution. May I have a proposer? Thank you, Latifa. Someone, shareholder, to second the motion? Thank you, Mrs. Grantaff. Those in favor? Any against?
I live in Stan. I need to the next interim dividends. We need to increase the...
Sorry, Mr. Young. Is this in relation to the resolution that we're taking now? All in favor? I think we got that. Oh, you are against? Okay.
The next interim dividends we need to increase the dividends and a quarter. Please on top.
All right, so you're against. So we have a majority confirming the motion, the resolution, so the ayes have it. And we note your comment, Mr. Livingston Young. Livingston Young, thank you. So I now move on to the third item of business on our agenda, the re-election of directors. In accordance with Article 44.1 of the company's Articles of Incorporation, 1/3 of the directors shall retire from office at each annual general meeting of the company. Accordingly, directors Mrs. Daniela Silvero and Mr. Colin Steele retire from office and, being eligible, offer themselves for re-election.
Madam Chair, who are these people? Who are these directors?
We're not them.
So, at the head table, we have Mrs. Daniela Silvero, chairman of the corporate. The name tags are at the front of the table.
Will she stand so we can recognize her?
That's right.
Hello, everybody.
All right.
And the other person is Mr. Colin Steele, well known. He is the chairman of the board, and he also retires from office.
Where is he?
He is online today.
This is foolishness. We can't elect somebody online.
Well, Mr. Steele is no stranger to us. There is a profile of Mr. Steele in our annual report, and so we will go on. But what you have said is noted.
We will go on. I would like to see the person physically. If he's not physically, we will put somebody else in this.
So, Mr. Staple, your comment is noted. He is at the meeting online. So we will go on with the resolution, and your comment has been duly noted. I would like to, it's in the annual report. It's in the annual report. So I would like to seek the permission of this meeting. I would like to seek the permission of this meeting to have the directors appointed en bloc.
Madam Chair, no. No.
Mr. Staple, there's an opportunity to vote. May we have a motion that the directors retiring by rotation and offering themselves for re-election be re-elected en bloc? Do I have a proposal? Latifa, thank you so much. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Mrs. Grantaft. Those in favor? Any against? 2 against. Okay, so the majority, the ayes have it. I declare the motion carried. The meeting having agreed, I will now put the following resolution to the meeting. And the resolution reads that directors Mrs. Daniela Silvero and Mr. Colin Steele be and are hereby re-elected directors of the company. Do I have a proposal?
Madam Chairman. We can't buy pussy in the bag, you know. I've seen people up front. No, we're not talking to that person. No, we put up on screen, I could see the person.
All right,
what is that?
yes, please. So let us continue. Do I have a proposal? Thank you, Latifa. Is there a seconder?
Robert McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. McKenzie. Those in favor? Thank you. Any against? Noted. 1 person against. The ayes have it, and I declare the motion carried. Now for the 4th item of business on the agenda. I now move on to the 4th item of business on our agenda, the remuneration of directors. The purpose of this resolution is to approve the directors' fees and authorize the board of directors to fix the remuneration of directors. I will now put the following resolution to the meeting. that the amount shown in the audited accounts of the company for the year ended December 31, 2021, as directors' fees for their services as directors be and is hereby approved. Do I have a proposal?
They don't deserve it.
Okay, we have a proposal. Latifa. Is there a seconder?
Is there one?
A seconder. Thank you, Mr. Mackenzie. Those in favor? Aye. Thank you. Any against?
Aye, against.
Two persons.
They don't deserve it.
Duly noted. Two against. So, duly noted. Thank you very much. The ayes have it, and I declare the motion carried. I will now put the second part of the following resolution to the meeting, that the directors be and are hereby authorized to fix their remuneration for the ensuing year. Do I have a proposal? Thanks again. And is there a seconder? Thank you, Mr. Mackenzie. Those in favor? Thank you. Any against? One person, duly noted. The ayes have it, and I declare the motion carried. The fifth item of business is the reappointment and remuneration of the auditors. The auditors of the company, PricewaterhouseCoopers Chartered Accountants, have agreed to continue in office pursuant to Section 154 of the Companies Act. The meeting is being asked to appoint and authorize the Board of Directors to fix the remuneration of the auditors. May we please have a motion that PricewaterhouseCoopers Chartered Accountants, having agreed to continue in office as auditors, be and are hereby appointed auditors for the company to hold office until the conclusion of the next annual general meeting at a remuneration to be fixed by the directors of the company. Do I have a proposal?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Staples. Is there a seconder?
I so moved, Chairman.
Second, thank you, Mr. Young. Those in favor? Thank you. Any against? So the ayes have it, and I declare the motion carried. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the point in the meeting where we have concluded the agenda. I would like to thank our shareholders for your spirited discussions, comments, which we appreciate. You know, your participation was highly noted and appreciated. And we would like to thank you for your continued interest and support. I will now call for the termination of this meeting, and I invite a shareholder to propose the resolution. May I have a proposal?
Madam Chair, before you close, I would like to say I have attended meetings of this before, and although you have tried your best, things could have been done in a different way and more advantageous to us as shareholders. We appreciate what you have done, and we hope that next year things will be different and things will be at a higher level than what we have seen here today. We appreciate what you have done, what the board has done, things could have been better. And we appreciate that for the future, things will be changed and things will be different from what it is today. Thank you.
Thanks for that. And so now, to terminate the meeting, may I have a proposal? Thank you. We'll take that afterwards. Is there a seconder? Alicia, thank you so much. All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Well, the ayes have it, and I now declare this meeting concluded. Once again, thank you so much for your attendance and your interest, and we look forward to your continued support in the coming year. Remember, stay invested. I hope for you and your families and loved ones that you continue to stay safe and have a good evening. And please stay behind to partake. Thank you very much.